Welcome to the Speaks Exchange podcast with your host, Donald Taylor. As a renowned learning and development industry expert, as well as chairman of the Learning and Performance Institute, Donald sits down with experts from around the globe to talk business communication, learning technology, language, digital transformation, and engaging, upskilling, and reskilling your organization. This podcast is brought to you by Speaks, the first intelligent language learning platform for the digital workplace. Listen in and you might learn a thing or two.
Welcome to another Speaks Exchange podcast. I'm Donald Taylor, your host, but I won't be doing most of the talking. I'll be listening with you to Dr. Hannah Gore, Learning Experience Consultant Extraordinaire. Those three words barely cover her range of experience and her depth of thinking about our field of learning and development. Hannah, as you know, we have a range of questions, typically 7 questions we get through in one of these exchange podcasts. For all interviewees, we ask them to introduce yourself. Hannah, can you introduce yourself? Get beyond the 3 words of learning experience consultant.
Okay, I just say that I work in the field of learning and development. I specialise in a number of different areas, and I look at, in general, learning experience. That can be anything from the learning and design to the engagement to how they pass through a platform, a course, a piece of content, a video, and all the data that comes with it.
That's great. Many people would say they do similar things. They haven't got your range of experience. Tell us about what you've done in the past, if you can.
Well, I've been in L&D now 20 years, which makes me feel exceptionally old.
I don't believe it.
No, it's true. Since I was about 2 years old, I got into L&D. And for 15 years, I've been working in online and blended learning. Prior to that, it was face-to-face for a number of different companies. I spent 13 years at the Open University, where I used to make content and platforms for around about 10 million people worldwide. And I worked with the Open University for 6 years on their MOOCs programs and their micro qualifications. And then 2 years ago, I moved to a company called Solera Holdings, which is a parent company for 37 companies in 93 countries. And I was there until the COVID outbreak, where I ran a business school for them that I developed from scratch based on flipped classroom blended methodology.
Very concise, and gives us a sense that you're not just making this stuff up. You've done it at scale across countries. And am I correct in saying that you have probably, you said you worked at the Open University, where you were in developing MOOCs, massive open online courses. Am I correct in saying you've probably developed more of those than anybody else, or produced them?
Apparently so. I have either produced, written, and I've presented over 300 of them now. It's also what my doctorate's in. My doctorate's in the largest single source data set of MOOCs from the Open University over a 3-year period. And it really looked into why people study MOOCs and how it impacts learning design, which from that you can take a lot of data from in developing online content moving forward.
Now, talking about developing online content, that's what we're here to discuss, because a lot of people right now are looking at how they can take content either for the classroom and put it online, or just go online straight away. What are the do's and the don'ts? What's your experience about doing it right? And what have you seen people doing wrong?
I think the addressing what people are doing wrong is probably important to address first. I'm seeing a lot of people putting PowerPoints up onto SharePoint and calling it online learning. No, that is not online learning. That is some learning that has been put online. They are 2 very different things. Online learning and learning design is a science. It's derived from research. It's a craft. Putting a PowerPoint online does not make for a good learning experience for anybody. And the easiest way to tell that is trying to do it yourself, because you will not move through that PowerPoint in the same way as you would if it was in an online, a face-to-face experience. It just wouldn't happen. So that is the number 1 don't. Please don't. SharePoints are great repository tools. They are not great learning platforms.
Yes, and we shouldn't beat up SharePoint. I mean, it's one of a variety of tools, but the issue isn't the tool. The issue is that you stick up, and it's not PowerPoint, it's full either, but the idea is you putting content in a place and saying, go learn, is only going to work for the most highly motivated of students.
Incredibly highly motivated students that already know the content. That's who it works for, which is a very niche part of your consumer group. SharePoints can be used in online learning. I used them at Solera, the last company I was at. They were used for repositories, either for documents that we'd embedded within courses as an alternative library. So they had them in 2 different places, but also as well, we used it as a repository for best practice. So ours was practice-based learning. They had to develop a portfolio as they were progressing through certain courses. They could then put that portfolio in the SharePoint for others to look at and see how they had developed a sales pitch presentation for a particular company or a particular product. That's what we used it for, and for nothing else. And for us, that worked. With the do's, I think right now is a really good opportunity for L&D people to really get into the sort of science of learning design, understand their people a hell of a lot more than they currently do, and really get to grips as to what their learning design portfolio, curriculum, catalogue, whatever is the buzzword that you use inside your company is. Because some things translate beautifully to online and some things don't. So testing is massively crucial. Test it yourself. Test it on a day that you don't want to do it. Get somebody who doesn't understand it to test it for you. If they've learned something, something's right. If they've got to the end and gone, what the hell was that all about? Or I lost the way, or I got bored, it's not right. You know, I never get things right first time round, even 300 odd courses in, well, 300 odd MOOCs, I've done stuff before that. They're still tweaking. It depends. It varies from subject to subject. So you can't cookie cutter everything. You can't go, this is the template I'm using for everything. It just won't work. And it's understanding that about what you've got.
You did mention the science and making sure you listen to your people. Okay, science of learning, fantastic. That covers a wide range. Is there one thing that you think people could benefit from focusing on?
I think they could benefit from understanding different types of learning taxonomies. So how a course is constructed, when you walk through a course, you know that there's articles in there, there's videos, there's quizzes, there's activities that they have to do. And it's about the balance of those. My doctorate went into that in quite a lot of detail. Anyone can read the executive summary or the conclusion if they want to sort of précis of that. But it's getting the mix right for the content that you have and the learners that you have makes it more engaging. If you just put up, and I've seen it done before, a PDF that's 40 pages long and gone, there's your course, you're going to get a page or two in and go, unless you printed it off and got out a highlighter pen, or you're making notes as you're going along, and you know what works for you as a learner. Most people will not sit down and read 40 pages on a particular way of learning a piece of content. They just won't.
Typically they won't. And by the way, of course, as well as reading the abstract of your thesis, they could also visit drhannahgore.com, and the URL is in the show notes. Now, you mentioned also talking to people. There are many ways of doing that, and I'm a great believer in quite well thought out ways of getting people together to not extract information from them, but rather to invite them to surface information, but in a way that is systematic. How would you go about, firstly, testing the stuff you've got, but also perhaps beforehand working out what will work with people, and then afterwards see how it's working when it's released into the wild? How do you talk to people and listen?
Yeah, when I worked with Solera, I spent a lot of time talking to the staff, either through interviews, focus groups, surveys. Always good, love a bit of data from a survey. But whatever data you think you had before this crisis, this COVID-19 crisis, is almost irrelevant, because people are now working from home, or they're working on split shifts, or they're working in a socially distanced warehouse. This is not the same as before. You can't put them all in the classroom. You can't have a quarterly review in the same kind of way. So you have to ask them again, you know, how are they learning? What kind of styles do they like? What kind of length content are they looking for in this new, more rapid paced world that we're in now, where the working environment is constantly changing based on new government guidance? And it's really breaking that down and then developing content and testing it in a beta environment. When I worked for Solera, we tested it on beta test groups and to see how they compare country to country, company to company. In the Open University, we would put content out on YouTube, iTunes U, podcasts to listen to, videos to watch that we would put inside courses later on, and test the water, see how people reacted, and then worked out, is this a good direction or a bad direction, before we made a bigger piece of content. And it is beneficial.
I've got to interrupt you for a second there, because I just want to fervently agree with you. And I think for too long, we've had the tradition in our field that you make something and you share it. And that might have been true in the past when we had one mechanism for distribution, the classroom, and we had a fairly predictable set of people we were working for, and their expectations coming into the classroom were established. Now everything's up in the air, and I think it doesn't do anybody any favours to make assumptions. We have to test. test all the time, as you say. I want to look to the future now. I want to picture where we are in 2021. Let's hope we're through this whole crisis, but we have a new normal.
Yes.
My phrase is, it will be digital by default. I'm not saying that everything has to be digital, but people will naturally be thinking, how do we do this online? Whereas in the past, they would have been thinking, how do we do this? And we'll do it physically. With that in mind, what will be different and what are we not taking into account looking to the future?
I think the first thing we have to take into account is we're never going back to January 2020. The world will have moved on in the forthcoming months. It already has massively now. And so we can't go back. And I think it's good not to go back. This is actually quite a good time for L&D. I wouldn't say it's necessarily all digital by default. I would say that the route may move to digital. I think there are certain aspects. When I worked in Solera, I used the flipped classroom methodology. I think that this is a good opportunity in the new normal to have flipped classrooms. So, for example, to give you an example, in the olden days, January 2020, it feels like a lifetime ago.
It doesn't seem like
Christmas
seems so
literally
remote,
feels like a decade ago. So back in January 2020, you wanted someone to brush up on their presentation skills. You would put them in a room with 20 other people, a PowerPoint handout, and somebody at the front of the room, and they would teach you, and I use bunny ears with that sometimes, how to give a great presentation. You will doodle on the notes. You'll go back to your desk, you put the notes inside the desk, and you'll carry on with your life. And then a month could go by and you've got to make a presentation. You pull out your notes, you look at them blankly, if you remember doodling, but that's it. And then you try to cobble something together and your boss is there puzzled because they're like, I sent you on training. This is not the magic pill that you can swallow. With flipped classroom methodology, what we did inside Solera instead was we created an online course about how to be a great presenter. And we looked at the science of building the narrative of a good presentation, the peaks and the troughs, the narrative that flows all the way through, how to use imaging correctly, how to use one strap lines that you work well for Twitter when you're in a conference, important key pieces of information that have to appear on the screen versus all the other stuff that doesn't, how to work a room, how to get people interested, all the science was there. And whilst they were learning this, they were writing their presentation. They had to pass it through their line manager, who was the checkpointer, not me, because of local differences and differences in local laws and variations on product. But then they would come to the classroom and then they would practice their presentation. What would happen is they would come out of that classroom in a better state than if they'd just walked in, sat down and doodled on a PowerPoint. And I think flipped classroom could be amazing for a lot of companies, especially ones that have got customer service skills, face-to-face skills, presentations, sales pitches, where you need to have the science first and then you practice your capability afterwards.
Absolutely. So classic flipped classroom model, you do the content piece at a pace that suits you in not necessarily your own time, but in time outside the classroom.
Yep.
And then when you come together, you're using that physical environment for what it does best. It could be presentation skills, it could be soft skills, interpersonal relationships, whatever. And it could also be, and one reason for getting people together could be actually online or it could be physically. One great reason for getting people together is always to check understanding, because there's always the possibility people have got the wrong end of the stick. So I buy that. When I say digital by default, of course, I mean people have to then justify why the physical space is worth doing, and it's absolutely worth doing in that case. Is the course always the answer? Or in this new world, 2021, are there other things people are using to learn from?
I mean,
is it always learning?
I think we're always learning. I mean, I'm learning every single day.
But what I mean is the answer to an issue isn't always learning. Sometimes it's a job aid, or it's
a practice, or it's an observation, or it's a buddy system. But there has to be concrete learning before they do the face-to-face. And I think that gives them confidence, because if you're in a workshop environment and you're sitting there and you're doodling, and then they say, can someone please give a presentation example? You go, oh! It's just the same when people ask you to put up your hand at a conference or doing around the room or something like that. You freeze up inside. But at least you're coming with some confidence. It also helps the facilitator of the face-to-face, because people are coming in with prior knowledge, a prior experience, a piece of content that they can work with, that content being a portfolio of some description. It could be a role play, it could be a presentation, it could be an example of something.
Maybe
it could
be
be
a database thing to fix, whatever.
Yeah, it could be, but they're working then with something.
Yeah.
So then they've got actual practice-based knowledge with actual practicing. So I think it's more powerful.
Now, one question that always comes up in this situation is, how do you get people to do the work beforehand? Because very often, and this, whether it's actually in a classroom physically or in a classroom online, there's always the issue to make sure people are motivated, engaged and committed enough to do that work.
Absolutely. With Solera, how I worked it was their line managers signed off the content before it came online to a classroom. And that was really important because it's the conversation that the managers had with the member of staff to go, oh, I think we should work on your presentation skills. Now, for me, there is transactional leaders and transformational managers. And a transactional leader is the type of person that just goes off and he says, oh, I know, you go do some presentation skills, off you go down the corridor. And then they come back and they don't mention it. And that's very transactional. But a transformational kind of leader is the type of person that goes, okay, let's work with it. What have you got? And it's not enough, especially in the company that I was in that was sales-based and software development-based, to say, I don't know why they didn't get that pitch for that client. It's not good enough. They have to know how their staff is working. How do you know how to develop your member of staff if you don't know how they're working? So with the manager signing them off, takes a hell of a lot of hassle out of the facilitator, because the facilitator doesn't have the kind of matrix management power that line management power has. But in a good way. It can be a good thing, not an oppressive thing, but in a team building way and a relationship with your manager kind of way. Show them your skills, show them what you're good at, and then develop it through.
It is the manager's job to do this. It is always the manager's job to support people, to make sure they are developing themselves and getting better at their jobs. The reality, as we know, is that too often people managers don't do this. To be honest, whether this is involving a technological change or a shift in pedagogy or not, this is actually a crucial thing anyway. How do we get managers involved? So if you want to bring managers along with you to make sure that people are learning much more effectively, how do you do it?
It's a culture shift. It takes time. It's hard work. A lot of blood, sweat and tears go into it. But there's two things that you
trying to be upbeat here, trying to give people positive ideas.
Well, I'm being realistic. I don't have a magic pill, but it's two things that you bring to the table to explain to the manager why they should do it. The first thing is, do you want a more highly effective team that does not waste any time? We're all about efficiency, especially if you work, in my case, where I used to work sales and software development, efficiency was everything.
Yeah.
So it's about being more efficient, doing your job properly, hitting those targets. Do you want to do that or not? Because this is the best way to do it. And the second thing is, whilst you're signing off your staff, your manager is signing off you. And that's really important, that they see that it goes all the way up the chain. It went all the way up to my managing director, right up to the top. He was signing off his directors. They have to see it's not just, I'm a low-level manager, I have to sign off the team at the coalface. It goes all the way up the chain. And so the MD sees them as well. They have to sign them off as well. Because if you want it to work, it has to go all the way through the company. And so once they realise that their managers are signing off and their managers are signing off, it's not, I'm not poking at them. I'm poking at the system as a whole to make it better. And showing them the results in other countries and other companies really helped. So you get pilots and champions. And by doing what we call high functioning training, it really showed a difference in their stats and in their performance. And managers are saying, yes, I understand my staff better. I've angled staff better for certain pitches, certain clients. I've moved staff around as a result, and we're much better performing. And there's also that kind of natural competition value. You know, you always want to be the best. You want to be the best that you can be, especially if you work in sales. And that has helped move it along as a culture. So that took time, but paid off dividends in the end. So it was worth the time it took.
I'd hazard that there's a certain amount of self-confidence required to go and have those conversations rather than simply saying, yeah, here's your course.
Yeah.
Do you think everyone can have that conversation with managers where they, or let's say you're starting with, you want to get one manager on board so that they can be the person who's going to show that it works in turn. How do you have the conversation with your first manager? Perhaps you're not feeling very confident about.
I think the first step is that L&D people are absolutely lovely. The problem is sometimes they're too lovely and they don't realise how powerful they actually are. So good L&D can make a company and bad L&D can break a company. And we're in a prime position to help that manager. We are not nice to haves, we need to haves. So you find a manager that you know is open to conversation, that maybe has a need that needs to be fixed. Look at your data for your company. Look at the 5-year strategy. See how you can fit into it and how you can help deliver. And start with a conversation of, I've noticed this inside. How are you going to progress this? How are you planning on hitting that target? How are you planning to do that rollout? And then start to weave in how you can help. And it's finding that pocket, but that pocket comes with research. You know, you can't just swan down an office and go, hiya. It doesn't necessarily work. I mean, I'm an extrovert, as you well know, so it's the type of thing I would do, but I base it on science, and I go, but I know you've got to deliver this, and I know that you've got to do this by this date, and I'm here to help you do it. And you've got to change it up. And you are, in effect, a salesperson for your own department, and you've just got to get out there and make people realise how important you are, now more than ever.
To them.
Immensely useful. Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned data. When we had the conversation prior to this recording, we discussed the fact that no course is ever really finished. And no form of online learning is ever really finished. It's always iterating. How do you use the data to make sure that you are iterating the right way to see what's working and what's not?
Yeah, there's 3 reasons why a course is never finished. First one is the content. It goes out of date. It happens. I mean, new things come to light, content changes, new developments inside the company, whatever that may be. You've got data and user review, how people are actually working their way through the content. Whatever that content is, it could be a course, could be a video, could be a podcast. You're seeing where they're stopping, they're starting, they're falling down, their quiz questions aren't quite right, whatever it may be.
Just to be clear, we're talking about tracking the behaviour and the interaction of users at different points within a course.
Absolutely. So you're looking at where they're dropping off, where they're stopping, where they're taking breaks, where they've got a question wrong. Is it you didn't explain the question very well, or you didn't explain the content earlier on very well? It's always one or the other. And also the company strategy review. Content changes based on the direction of the company and where it's going. So if there is a change in direction, for example, you've changed to consultative selling, then you need to change your content to move towards consultative selling. And so no course is ever finished. And once you've assigned yourself to that, it is much easier to then take it apart and undo it again. If you go, oh, but I finished that one, I thought I ticked it off. If you're always in the belief that you're there to make it better, then it's easier to go back and pull it apart, take bits out, put new bits in.
And I think this addresses one of the issues which I've always observed with learning and development, which is we tend to want to create things. But we are not, yes, we are creating things, but that's not the point. What we're doing is we're engaging in a process. The process is constantly examining our activity to see how effective it is. That's different from our focus being on creating a course. And if you focus on the activity as a process, rather than it coming to this thing that you then don't want to change, that helps you. And it helps the organisation as well. And it also helps because obviously you want to make sure the course or the materials are as good as they are, but it also means that you're not, as too often learning and development is, it also means that you're not shackled to the idea of perfection, wanting to create the perfect course before you launch it.
It's so dangerous. I see it all the time, people writing content. And they go, it's not quite ready yet. It's never ready. It's never finished.
It's not quite ready yet. It's never quite finished.
It's never quite finished. And that is okay to be that, because until you've tested it, do you know if it's actually any good? I mean, you could spend a year writing a book, a year making a course, and then it's just all fallen apart in the first 30 minutes of someone actually taking it. So never look at it like that. And also as well, the importance of having that culture around you and explaining that to the people that you work with means that people do come to you and go, oh, I've noticed this, or oh, we've changed a procedure here, or we've added a new piece of feature to this piece of software. You know, can we add it into the course? And they know it's okay to do so. That they can go, let me help you update it as well.
We talked about a lot of change. We talked about shifting to a flipped model. We talked about justifying use of physical space. We talked about going out, finding managers and effectively selling to them. We talked about using data. We talked about iterating process rather than producing fixed result content. This is a very different sort of learning and development. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the outcomes of all this?
I'm 50-50. The reason why I'm optimistic is I talk about COVID-19 like it's an apocalypse constantly. And the reason why is it allows me to wipe the slate clean and start over in anything I'm doing. And I can just go, anything pre-apocalypse doesn't count. And I can start again. And that's an amazing mindset to have, because you can do anything you want. You can be anybody you want. It's the same with L&D. It could be anything you want. You can now start to develop a new strategy based on this new world that we're in. But I'm also pessimistic in the fact that people are seeing this phenomenon as a stopgap, as a holding pattern until we get back to work, until we're allowed to stand within 1 foot of each other instead of 6 feet. And we can put them back in the classroom again, and we'll take everything off SharePoint and we'll just go back to the way it was. And there is that danger, because old habits die hard. And I think that's where I've got it's almost like a seesaw, where there's some days I look at LinkedIn, discussions on blogs, Twitter, and I think, oh, this is going to be great. And then there's other days that I can see people want to cling on to the comforts of the past and just go, yes, oh, that'd be really great again if I can have that experience. And I had this situation, we did a webinar recently, Don and I, and someone contacted me afterwards, and he was doing his first ever webinar training instead of a get-together training. And I broke down to him, how to do it all. But also, I said, what is it you love the most about this get-together training? It was always over 3 days. And he said, catching up with everybody before the training, because they always do it from a hotel, they all travel there, the usual hotel conference room job. But the thing that they really love about it is the curry after the first night. And I said, there is no reason why in this world you still can't do that just through the medium of Zoom, Skype, FaceTime, house party, whatever it may be. Those are the things that glue it together. That has nothing to do with the training. So once you take that out of the equation, you can transfer the training. It's how do you develop, and we had a long chat about how to develop social interaction around online to make it feel real. That was the glue that stuck the whole thing together. So I think, people can think differently now, but they may also slip back into old ways. And I think this is such a good opportunity to go, let's change the world today, that we shouldn't pass it up, because this is across the board. So we need to really address how we as L&D people can be trailblazers in that.
Firstly, thank you. Really comprehensive answer with a lot of insight. And I think there's something to add to it as well, if I may. Whatever learning and development decides to do, when lockdown finishes and we come out of it, people who write checks and pay for things will be probably asking, why are we sending people to this physical space to get trained when for 6 months we were able, apparently, to do most things online? Now, unless you've got a very good answer for that, you're suddenly going to find yourself on the back foot doing what the financial people want. And it may be that it's right to do it online. It may be that it's wrong. But have an answer, be ready for it. You're right, it's not a stopgap. This is not a temporary thing. Things are going to change as a result of the process we're going through at the moment.
Absolutely. I think so. I think you've got to go in prepared. You've got to start working out what is the next 5-year strategy going to look like. And that rewrites itself every 6 to 12 months. Because we don't know how long we're going to be in this situation for, and we don't know what the situation is going to look like when we come out of it. And I think we have to be thinking like that, and not thinking, oh, one more day is one less day, because when this happens, when we all get to smell fresh air again and hug each other, it's going to be a different world.
It will be a different world, no question about it. Finally, Hannah, some questions that we ask every guest. 2 questions. What do you wish you'd known when you started in learning and development, and what are you curious about right now? So what do you wish you'd known when you started?
Absolutely nothing different. I know a lot of people will go, oh, I'd really like to have known this or this or this. If I'd known anything based on how my life has turned out in L&D, I wouldn't be the person I am today. I wouldn't have got to the places I've done. I wouldn't have experimented in the way that I had. If I knew that a certain way of developing L&D would fail, would I not do it, or would I still do it and still get the same learning from it? And for me, I'd rather stick exactly the same way, because I've learned so much in what's worked and what hasn't worked. In the same way Edison made 1,000 different light bulbs that didn't work and one that did work, I feel that has helped shape me and my thinking.